Thank you very much, Commissioner. Our next speaker is also from DEP. Patricia Ingelido has been very much involved with the Barnegat Bay program over the years, and we have asked her to come and talk with us a bit about sort of an overview of the partnership angle with regard to the Barnegat Bay initiative. So, Trish.
Thanks. Good morning, everyone. How's everybody doing? I'd like to thank the council for inviting me here to speak about one of my favorite subject matters, which is Barnegat Bay. How many of you, everybody familiar? When I was driving in this morning, I took a step back. Barnegat Bay is something that I kind of live and breathe on a daily basis. Everybody familiar with where? I thought I should have brought a map where Barnegat Bay is. Basically, if you think about Ocean County, that's almost your watershed, starting at Point Pleasant Canal, all the way down to Little Egg Harbor Inlet. So just to give you perspective, and I do have some maps in here, but I was thinking about it on my drive up, like maybe I should have started out with a map. So just to get started with, the clicker is where? Oh, thanks, Dan. Thank you. Go like this, okay. So let's get started. So how did the Barnegat Bay Initiative start? Well, basically we were founded on a public process. So in the spring and summer of 2010, there were 3 separate facilitated public hearings that were held in the watershed that looked at 3 specific asks. What's the science that we know? What are the actions that are going on? And then what are the problems and what are the solutions? And I think it's really important to think about this as we move forward and thinking about that concept as the commissioner has teed up for us about how partnerships can happen in other areas of the state. Obviously, there was work that was going on in Barnegat Bay before 2010, and work that the department was doing, as well as work that others had been doing for a long time. And as we were taking a step forward in Barnegat Bay, it's always important to take a look back at what we've had already done. And so we did that in order for us to move forward. Based on those recommendations and what came out of those 3 public meetings was the 10-point plan that the commissioner was speaking of. I've highlighted the few action items that I'm going to touch on a little bit about partnerships, with action item number 7, which is the work that I am a co-lead on doing. So I'm going to speak mostly about that. And I do want to say that, as I had said on my title slide, I say presented by, but this is a work of many, many people. We have a Barnegat Bay team in the department. I'm the one standing up here talking about it, but I am for sure not the one who has done all the work. So as the commissioner said, this plan, taking from the foundation of the public process, we have all these action items that vary from the close of Oyster Creek down to reducing watercraft impact. And to think about partnerships inside the department, each of those action items was then kind of given as a charge to a certain division or section of the department. So within the department itself, it became a partnership. For example, acquiring open space, Green Acres works on that, where the water quality standards, the Division of Water Monitoring Standards works on that, but we now all sit on this Barnegat Bay team. So you now have this team of people in the department that are from various disciplines and backgrounds working on the same subject matter. Okay, so funding stormwater mitigation projects. So over $22 million were spent on 29 different projects within the watershed to address stormwater issues, from equipment purchases to dredging projects to retrofitting of stormwater basins. One other thing you have to think about, and why partnerships are important, is because there needs to be somebody at the local level who's going to then implement that structure. If you want to retrofit a basin, what basin needs to be retrofitted? Once it is it county-owned, is it municipality-owned, and who's going to be the department's partner on bringing that forward? So just those things that we think about, it seems like, even if you had all the money in the world, which we all would love, right, to address stormwater impacts, we need to know the where, the when, who's going to help us maintain it, who's going to help us manage that, and that requires local partners. The fertilizer law started out with the Healthy Lawns, Healthy Water Work Group, again, was working on fertilizer issues in the state previous to the Barnegat Bay Initiative and focusing really a lot on phosphorus. When this came out and the action plan came out, as the commissioner had said, one of the strictest laws related to fertilizer in the state, and adding nitrogen to that. Our focus a lot had been on phosphorus because of freshwaters and the importance of that. But as we're getting into the estuarine systems, nitrogen is a really important component. So kind of adding into that work group, but we can't just look at phosphorus, we need to look at nitrogen. And that involved working with those corporations that produce fertilizer. And so that Healthy Water, Healthy Lawns work group had representation from all of those organizations helping us to move forward. Acquiring land in the open space. As the Commissioner said, over 3,700 acres have been acquired to date, and they're hoping to have 100 more that they're hoping to acquire by the end of this calendar year. So again, this requires a local partnership. You can find a piece of land that you want to purchase, but a lot of times it's contiguous with the county park or a municipal park, and who's going to maintain that once the department purchases it? Who's going to take over maintenance? All these different pieces requires partnerships at different levels. And the Commissioner spoke to this about the Barnegat Bay Blitz and that we had those 6 blitzes, and I think it's really important, as he said, we had 37 municipalities all on the same day, 6 separate times go out there and do work within the watershed. One of the things that was most interesting about that early on in the process was towns like Jackson and some of those towns that are higher in the watershed maybe not initially didn't consider themselves Barnegat Bay towns. I'm not a coastal community, I'm not on the coast, but yet their watershed drains to Barnegat Bay. So besides getting people out there and getting them to do work within their municipality and make all those improvements the Commissioner talked about all the trash that was picked up, it also was an opportunity to get people to realize that that town that they think is so far away, miles away from Barnegat Bay, actually impacts Barnegat Bay. And so that's something that was really important about that. And then we have what we call, and that's a map of the Barnegat Bay watershed, for those of you who don't know, anybody who's ever been to Long Beach Island, you've driven over it. So we call, the people that work on action item number 8, they call it the Barnegat Bay babies, right? So they have all these, Barnegat Bay Blitz babies. They have all these other subsequent projects that have come off of that. Any of you are familiar with the illegal dumping project that the department is doing? That came out of the Blitz. So we would go out year 1 and we would see folks, we would see 37 televisions, 37 televisions at a site, and we'd clean them up and we'd feel great. We go out year 2, the same site, there's 47 televisions. And it made the department think, this is illegal dumping. This is not your average trash that gets consumed. And so because of that, this whole separate initiative has happened related to illegal dumping. As well as the Rain Barrel Challenge, which is something we do with schools, where we engage schools, give schools a rain barrel, have them paint it related to a subject matter, the natural community of Barnegat Bay, or what can you do to help. And then at that same time, when you're engaging those schools, you're getting a water conservation message out there, and you're integrating all the things that relate to Barnegat Bay. And again, as he said with the Blitz, so many partners are involved in the work that we do with the various blitzes. And then the Commissioner spoke about the Bulkhead Blitz, which is our most recent Blitz baby, which has to do with addressing sea nettle populations in Barnegat Bay and getting communities out there to scrub their bulkheads, which is something that we learned from the science, that the work that was done. We had a researcher that one of the issues that came out of the public process was, why are the sea nettle populations, the stinging sea nettles, increasing in Barnegat Bay? And he did a lot of research on that, and one of the things was that bulkheads, plastic bulkheads, are the perfect location for them to kind of settle in the winter. And if you just dislodge them, maybe they won't be able to reproduce. And so that was where that came from. The reduced watercraft impacts. One of the things there was we had some enforcement sweeps associated with it. Is we put these environmental sensitive areas out, and then we had people, we sent out information. The Green Boating app has come out of this and said in these areas, these are like low and no wake zone areas. And one of the things that we wanted to see is if we gave that information out, what was the response from the community? So we had volunteers out there in the water, people like Reclaim the Bay and other folks that spend a lot of time on the water, looking at our ESAs and counting. How many personal watercrafts were coming through that area? How many were above and below the no wake and following it? It allowed us to really, see what the kind of effectiveness is of our education related to those issues, as well as identify areas for us where we should target, where we're seeing a lot of boating happening. And that was all partnerships with local organizations and communities. Okay, and now I'm going to spend the most time talking about action item number 7. We speak in action items, so apologize if I'm going back and forth, that we're ingrained in it. I'll try not to. But this is the action item that I'm most involved in, and it has to do with adopting more rigorous water quality standards. And one of the things that we realized early on in the process is we knew that we had to develop a hydrodynamic and water quality model of Barnegat Bay in order for us to determine what we think the appropriate endpoints will be to address the ecological health. And we need to simultaneously sample the tributaries and the bays at the same time. And if you look back at this photo here, this is a list of our stations. We have 13 stations on all the 13 major tributaries from north to south, from the Metedeconk River up here at BT01, all the way down to BT13, which is in Tuckerton, and then BB01, which is at Point Pleasant Canal, all the way down to BB14, which is at Little Lake Harbor Inlet. In order for us to develop that model at that scale, we had lots of data. The department had been collecting data, and other organizations have been collecting data for some time, but we needed data at the same time as we had TRIB and BAY, and we needed data collected under the same quality assurance project plan, and data that used the same labs and the same methods. And so the first thing we realized when we started down this path is that it exceeded the capacity of the department. There was no way that with the existing staff and resources that we had in both of our both of our bureaus that do water monitoring, that we could do it alone. As the commissioner said, just to give you a perspective of the scale of the project, in the first 6 months alone, as he said, 75,000 field measurements were made, and over 10,000 bottles were going to 4 different laboratories. There was no way for us to do that alone, and so we had to ask for help, which is the first step. This just gives you an idea of what that looked like. So we had these fantastic flow charts, because in the beginning it was like, where are things going? How are we getting there? Who's doing what? So we had all of our partners out on the bay. We had Monmouth University, EPA, were volunteering their times to collect the bay samples. We then had organizations that were collecting tributary samples from Mates High School, as the commissioner said, Brick Township MUA, the Barnegat Bay Partnership. All of those then went to 2 separate field laboratories for preservation, and then sent to several different laboratories for analysis in the beginning of the project. We had 5 separate laboratories, as the commissioner said, involved in this project. And then the coding of the little lines is, well, what parameters went to what labs? Nutrients went to this lab, BOD goes to this lab. And so we for sure needed the help of our partners. So how do we find interesting and willing partners? And the commissioner spoke to this in his opening remarks about the council. And similarly, we have a New Jersey Water Monitoring Council. And that council works with us as a data sharing organization, and that's who we went to first. Here is an existing body of people that do water monitoring all the time. So we kind of came to them first and said, who here thinks they can help us with this initiatives? And just kind of going out there and asking people what they can do. And that's kind of what we're here today, and what the commissioner spoke about is, are there other opportunities outside of Barnegat Bay, right? Like, that's where we have to start, is who has resources they're willing to kind of leverage with the work that we're doing, and how to find them. And we started that in Barnegat Bay, going around, hey, we need someone to do BOD samples. Can you do it? Can you do it? You know, Ocean County Utilities Authority, for example, analyzed BOD samples for us for, I think, about, I want to say 13 months for no charge. They did not charge the department for that work. So those are things that, what can you, and it's funny because then someone went on maternity leave, so it was like, we can do it till then, but after that, you got to find somebody else. But that's the kind of thing that has to happen. And that has to do with being flexible and communicating, as the commissioner had said. And then adding those monitoring and lab partners as we went along. There was 17 partner organizations, as the commissioner spoke about, throughout the time. At any given time, the partner range went from 10 to 12 to 15 because, like I said, Ocean County Utilities Authority was there for the first 12 months or so, and then someone else stepped up to take that role, as well as in monitoring partners. And then finding partners within our own agency, which was huge, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. And then retasking existing partner work. We have an existing relationship with the USGS to do flow measurements. And so kind of saying to them, hey, instead of doing flow measurements there, can you take some extra here, and retasking that work. And similarly in our network, we had to look at where else we were doing work in the state and how we could best leverage, well, I'm going to be out in Barnegat Bay anyway for collecting macroinvertebrates for the statewide AMNet network, so that's the same time I'm going to be doing my chemistry. So kind of retasking work to fit into the role. But the most important thing, and I'll go over this a little bit for us, for the water quality monitoring side, is always having that agreement, that monitoring agreement, and understanding what the roles and expectations are. And that was really important to us for data quality and data management. And we had written agreements with each agency and entity that worked with us. So they signed on and said, yes, I'm going to collect these samples on these days at these times. And that was a real important part of that partnership. And quality assurance was key. We are using this to develop a water quality model to make resource management decisions. We needed to ensure that the water quality and the quality of the work was consistent across the board. And so that was really important, to have a quality assurance project plan. And that's something that historically, from my experience in the department, is something you write your quality assurance project plan in the beginning of the project, and then at the end, you're done, right? We've had 7 revisions of the quality assurance project plan within the first 18 months or so, because we had to be flexible. And as we went along the process, an example of that is in the beginning, we didn't have bottom samples. We just had surface samples. So 6 months in, it was like, we really need bottom and surface samples to see what's going on. So then you add those stations in. To changing laboratories, to changing methods. In the very beginning, for total phosphorus measurements, everything was below the detection limit. So we're getting back everything, and we're like, okay, we need to address that. We need to change the detection limit. We need to work with the laboratory. So looking at that quality assurance project plan as a living document, and being flexible throughout and talking to the laboratories, and as you're looking at the data and making decisions, was a really important part. And then we had training. We had all these partners. Like I said, we had 17 different people and a lot of different organizations collecting data for us. So we needed to have training with those partners. And we worked very closely with our Office of Quality Assurance to ensure that on an annual basis, all those partners get approved for the parameters they're collecting, making sure they know what is expected of them. And that's something that was really, and that communication, as the commissioner has said, that was the number one thing, is communication, communication, communication. There's no way around it. And frequently, we had one point of contact for the overall monitoring project, which was myself, but then there was a field contact for the tributary and a field contact for the bay, because anybody who's done environmental field work, at any given day, the weather can and cannot be your friend. So at some point, we need to call off or call on who's going, who's not. We'll do the tribs today, but not the bay, all those decisions with 17 partner organizations that aren't in the department. And so communication, I used to laugh, and I said that to our partners, every time they see my name in their inbox, they were like, oh no, what's going on? What is Trish asking us to do now? Or what is she telling us we have to do differently? But it was really important. And then access to the data, which I also thought is a very important piece of the partnerships, is people want to see what happened for all the work that they did. And when I collected that data, where did it end up? What did it mean? I spent all that time doing that work. I want to see kind of the fruits of my labor. And so we spent a lot of time doing that. And as the commissioner said, and continue to do so, to spread that message of what's going on. So this is a map to show you who sampled what stations, from the different tributary stations to the different bay stations, and all of these organizations did this at no cost. I mean, they were volunteering their time to the department to be a part of this initiative. So this wasn't grant funded. We didn't give them a grant to do this work with us. They became a part of our team and worked with us. The intensive monitoring, all on its own, has to be talked about, because one of the things that we thought about early on in the process is to do a model. All of our samples happen between 8 and 10 in the morning. Obviously, things change after 10 in the morning in an estuarine system that has a tide coming in and out of it, right? So collecting samples and knowing how chemistry changed throughout the day was a really important piece of model development. So certain things you can do with continuous meters. You can put out a sonde that can collect, but you can't collect chlorophyll that way. Well, you're starting to be able to, but overall you can't collect chlorophyll that way. You can't collect total phosphorus that way. So we needed to have people out there collecting 6 samples a day throughout the week. So how are we going to do that? This is what that kind of looked like, and we had runner routes. And we had, as the commissioner said about the marinas, we had to go out to marinas and say, hey, is it okay for us to show up before you open? Because we need to take our first sample at 5 a.m. And will you give us the code to your bathroom so that our staff can use your bathroom? I mean, just things like that. Do you have any ice? Because we need to keep these samples, at a certain temperature. All those little details to get that kind of work done were important. And one of the first things we realized when we drew this and thought about, we're taking a 5 a.m., a 7, so from 5 a.m. till 8 p.m. we were taking samples throughout the day. And the woman who is our modeling lead, Helen Pang, she always says, her thing is, originally we wanted 8 samples a day. And then she went down to the lab to help label bottles on the first day of the intensive and said, oh, thank God we only did 6, because just the bottle labeling alone. But the one thing we thought about with this was, how are we getting that many cars driving things around? Because we're going to labs all over the state and cars. And we have an entire department here of people that are assigned state vehicles, not to do water monitoring, but to do compliance and enforcement and do other things. And so that's what within our own department, we had over 140 DEP staff that helped us do this intensive monitoring. People from air permitting, people that had state vehicles, we kind of put a call out, and to get that, to get the ability to think outside the box, and to get that support from the commissioner and from management to say, you know, it sounded kind of like a crazy idea. Can you allow people that have assigned state vehicles to give me 4 days of driving samples around? When you think about that ask, but the answer was, yeah, let's do it. And so that's an important part of it too, is kind of thinking outside the box and where you can get partners. So just to give you the feel for it, as I said, there was 27 sampling locations. We had 6 boats, 13 sampling teams, 30 different runner routes, it took 75 people a day to get it accomplished. Over 140 staff were involved, and we collected over 4,000 samples just in that period of time. And this is what that looks like in real life. So one of the things that, and this is just, oh, let me go back. This is just like 2 parameters that this lab analyzes. That was another thing, coolers. You needed hundreds and hundreds of coolers. Where are you getting them from? And we had people in the department, make sure you put your last name on it. They were bringing in their tailgate cooler for us to use. Put your last, we'll get it back to you. I mean, those little things that you think about, but you have to, you know, and that's all partnership. It's we have a need. Is there a way for you to help fill it? Maybe it's just giving us a cooler. We were set up at Mates High School in their cafeteria, so we could use their ice machines. And just those little things are all partnerships, and they seem so minor at times, but we legitimately could not have done it without Mates High School's cooler. We could not have done it. So that's what partnerships mean to me. It's something I'm pretty passionate about. And the commissioner kind of talked about this a little bit, the 17 partner organizations and the 2 different field laboratories, and then went to 5 laboratories for analysis. And so what did I learn about it, me personally, in my experience? The number one thing was don't be afraid to ask. And those are the kind of things, is sometimes you were given this task, well, how am I going to get it done? I'm just going to ask. Ocean County Utilities Authority, will you be able to do this? But we don't have any money. Sure, we'll do it. Or can we ask DEP people that have state vehicles to drive around samples for the day? You have to not be afraid to ask for help. And that's the first thing with partnerships, I feel like, is being able to say, here's what we need your help with, and what do you think you can do to help us? And different people bring different things. And that quality assurance needs to be a focus. That's a really important piece. We spent a lot of time on quality assurance, and I still spend a lot of time on quality assurance, because in order for us to be able to use that data, there was a time where during the intensive sampling event, a runner didn't get in there in time, and the boat left, and those samples were sitting on the dock. Well, we had to toss them, because we need chain of custody. So the chain of custody forms alone, I think the volunteers and the people that worked with us probably curse me to this day for it. But that was important. We needed to know every single hand. So when we had those runners routes, there's a time you had a chain of custody that cooler went from 5 different people's hands that day, and every single time they had to sign off on it. Communicating, as the commissioner said, and being flexible, and that's part of it. One of the things, for example, we worked with the Department of Health Laboratory to do our analysis, and they closed at 5 o'clock. Well, our last sample is collected at 8 o'clock. Can you stay open till 11 o'clock? You know, those are the kind of questions you have to ask. And then flexibility within that to say, sure, we'll stay open until 11 o'clock, and how are we going to address that with staff time, and how's that going to work, and how our holding time is going to work, what can be held over. So being flexible is really important. Building a safety net, that was something we had to do at the department, is always have a ready-to-go sampling team in case something happened. So we couldn't put out our entire sampling capacity day of. We had a reservist sampling team. This picture is a picture of EPA's boat that overturned on their way to one of our sampling events. So that day it was like, hey, we're not going to get there. So can you send out another boat to collect those samples? So reserving that capacity is really important. And again, expect the unexpected. Everything that you think is going to go wrong will not, and everything that you never thought of will go wrong. And then how we use that as a model for ourselves within the division. One of the things that was really interesting was using Leeds Point Laboratory, which is our Bureau of Marine Water Monitoring laboratories, to analyze fresh water. We had never done that before until this project. And now we've had several projects since then where we rely on them to do freshwater analysis. It was one of those things, well, we need total phosphorus measurements, but we always do it in marine water. Well, why can't we do it in fresh too? And then working with partners in our other networks, that whole quality assurance thing and working with partners and having them sign on to our QOP and that monitoring agreement, we have taken that for our summer pathogen network. It's difficult for the department to get out there and collect 5 samples in 30 days at all these stations. And so we've worked with the Upper Raritan Headwaters Association to help us collect those samplers, similar to our experience with Barnegat Bay. And then some cross-bureau training. Examples like the Bureau of Marine Water Monitoring had never done flow monitoring because they don't traditionally do freshwater stuff. So then they got trained in doing that. And for us, the bureau that I work in, we do analysis. We're normally the data, other side of the data. We analyze it once it comes in. We had the opportunity to get out there, see how the data is collected, and see what was going on. And that was really important to us. It does make you think about, like Helen, my colleague Helen says, when I'm asking for 10 samples, what that means when I'm asking for 10 samples, and vice versa. For our field staff, for them to understand by working with us why we're asking those things. And that was really critical. And then our AmeriCorps program is a program that collects a lot of this data, collects data throughout the year, doing AMNet work and doing macroinvertebrate work in streams, and it really allowed us to think about, well, you know, we have these resources that do it at the state level. Let's have them help support and train those watershed ambassadors to do macroinvertebrate sampling. And then partnering within the plan. As the commissioner said, there's several action items, but action item 7 doesn't just speak to our work, it speaks to the work of others. You know, number 2 and number 3, the closing of Oyster Creek and the fertilizer law, having all this monitoring data is going to help us see what the effects of those things will be. We developed a sampling video. My friend Fritz back there, he and I spent a lot of time, kind of a day in the life of the Barnegat Bay sample and describing that monitoring project so people could see what we were doing. And then action item number 9, which we didn't speak about today, but all that research that the commissioner was talking about, filling in those research gaps, a lot of that work is helpful for us to develop nutrient criteria. And then sample collection support. The Academy of Natural Sciences, for example, had phytoplankton work they wanted to do. They didn't have boats, but we were like, hey, we're going to be out there. We'll grab your sample when we're out there. And then they got shipped to the Academy for them to do their own analysis. So there was a lot of partnering within the plan itself. And then I just want to give credit to all the folks that helped work on that. And that's it. Sorry if I spoke too fast.
Thank you.